making a clear definition of the two makes a lot of sense, especially for a lot of people, so that they know that okay, they're two separate things, and if they're correlating in some aspect, that will be documented. But as it stands, they're two separate, right? So yeah, I completely agree. Making that distinction should be done, should be done pretty soon. Kind of. Yeah, that's basically my thoughts on that. If that's clear.
Thanks. It seems somebody did join with the CNCF Notary, so now it's being live streamed. That's good.
Hey folks, sorry, I'm a few minutes late. I just started the live streaming.
Oh, are you okay?
Oh no, I'm okay. I had a regular annual checkup, doctor appointment. That's done. Yeah.
I was going to share your point, but now since you're here, you can probably like talk about it. Or
I just joined. I don't know what was the conversation going on before that. If you can, guys.
Yeah, so
Right.
basically it was a discussion of kind of like aligning with notation as a name versus a notary project and notary signature that we were discussing. And so do you want to talk about it? Because you kind of like asked me to kind of like bring up the point, right?
You can certainly talk about that. I don't know what's the popular opinion, but my kind of view of this was like we have notary project as organization, right? And under this organization, we can have multiple sub-projects, and it will be good if we define this nomenclature under the project itself. So notation is just one sub-project, and the notary, the original notary, is another sub-project. And this is a separate question how we handle that. But coming back to I believe the question is about specifications and whether we use notary project as a terminology for the specification or whether we use notation for the specification. Now, the way like we experience this with at least partners that we are kind of working with, they do, at least like Kyverno does not use notation as for the signature, right? Every time when we talk with Kyverno, they use either notary signature or notary project signature, right? They do not look at the tool as the specification part. The other thing is we have engaged with certain kind of teams or other communities. We would like to understand how we can parse the notary signature. And again, I use notary signature because that's the term they use when we have those conversations, without actually even using notation or notation library. So we have partners who are interested in, or internal teams inside Microsoft who are interested to use other languages and other tools. The only thing that they are interested is in the signature, no mention of the tool itself, right? That's where I'm coming, that maybe it's better from branding if we separate kind of how do we call the signature specification from the tool itself, because if we tie them together, the assumption is that you cannot do anything with these signatures unless you use the tool. And that is not something that we see from at least our engagements. Does that make sense?
Yeah, Tony, let me go. I think let's go the 2 points you mentioned, right? The first point was about a partner like Kyverno who is using the notary specifications today, or sorry, using the word notary to refer to the integration with what we have done here in the last 2 years. We could probably go back and educate them on it. So that's one way to just fix with that. But I think you're talking about that there are other users out there within an enterprise and even broader than you and I can name today, even there, I believe the word notation specification or some other word that we use, which makes it clear that these specifications don't apply to the existing notary from 5 years ago, will help. Because anybody who comes will say, okay, so this was the notary as we knew it. The notary project came up with a new specification. This specification is the specification going forward, and they have a tool notation which works with it. I think we are aligned on that objective. What we are trying to do is avoid confusion for anybody that these specifications may apply to the existing notary project or the existing notary. So I think if we can pick the right name for this repo, we'll be settled. And the current option on the table is notation dash spec. That's one of the names on the table. But if we pick up a different name, which gives a clean separation, I think we'll be fine.
And Samir, I don't think there is a disagreement on the goal, right? We certainly want to decouple the TUF-based implementation that is done in Notary from the kind of specification or whatever tooling we are going with forward. What I am also trying to avoid is to create a confusion with the customers that if, for example, you want to use the signature, you have to use notation or notation libraries. That is already a contention point. So what I'm afraid is that if we go with notation, we'll create another confusion that will be similar to the notary confusion. And having in mind that the name of the organization is Notary Project, so logically, either we need to go and rename the whole organization differently, and that is something that is also an option on the table. We can go and, I don't know, name it something completely different. So we avoid this confusion with notary project notation. But I think if we tie our specifications to notation, the name notation, that will certainly imply to everybody that, well, this is for notation only, right? And it's not a portable across tool signature that you can use.
Just a quick follow-up question on that. You're talking about the signature is distinct from the tool.
Exactly.
Right. But is it the intention, or are we obligated to show people how to generate or verify a signature without using the tool?
Exactly.
We are obliged, or no?
We are obliged because we have these use cases already, and they actually, people do not want to use the existing tool, or they have no capability to use the existing tool and existing libraries to specifically on both sides, on the signing and on verification part.
Okay. Then separately, again, I don't want to get us off track because it seems like you all are talking about naming, which I think is really important, but we should probably have a discussion item around what does that mean from a documentation perspective, because notary project.dev, the docs there are all targeted using the tool currently called notation. So do we have to consider refactoring those to use something else? Do we have a separate doc site? Do we leave that content in GitHub only? Again, those are just options I'm laying out there and discussion points that we have to have that I think we should return to at some point, but didn't want that just to sit in my brain. But yes, please continue with the whole naming discussion. I don't want to interrupt that too much.
But Zach, please file this, so I'm pretty sure we don't want to miss what you just mentioned. I don't know who is driving the meeting, but Sajay, I see your hand.
Yeah, I'd love to comment in the chat. That's regarding the naming, but I also want to probably talk to Zach's point, which is specification repos typically produce some kind of an archive, a zip or a PDF or something that can be released. So when the specs repo released, there should be some artifact that others can refer to, check in if they want to, or just read as a one shot. I think that's necessary. I don't know whether the specs repo currently produces something like that. I know it produces a zip, but maybe some post work to actually produce a PDF might be something that we can queue up. Other specs repo do this, so it might be good to consider that as an option as well. But that's orthogonal to the naming question. But to Toddy's point, I think if we kind of like confuse notation as the Go library and the CLI and try to make it the spec, that might be one more order of rewiring of communication that we've had with in multiple places. That's kind of, I kind of echo the same thing. So we could clearly call out that this is the signature specification, right? And for Notary project, and for the time being, at least for the near future, say that this is not compatible with the tough repo or the old Notary repo, which is planned for archive. Plus, we could do it like what OCI does, which is, yes, you can define the OCI container images. This is how it works. But we understand that there are some old specifications like Docker manifest, and things like that that is not a part of the specification, but it might be there for reference and things like that. So that way we make forward progress, and we kind of like shift the view towards the specification repo. I think the starter repo was the problem, right? Notary project kind of like confused the heck out of people that this was a specification repo. I think that was clear from our side, but we never named it that way. So just calling it what it is might avoid more churn. That's how I see it. So if people feel that that's okay, that we clarify on the top that this is not tough specification for tough specification C here, that might be good enough. That is what I'm thinking.
Yeah, I think it's important to have some sort of place where we have a major clarification on what everything means, even if it's like two sentences, such that what you were saying, Sajay, which is, Notary project is the umbrella of everything. Notary, there are Notary signatures, and notation is our implemented tool to do those signatures, but you may use different tools to generate Notary signatures.
Right. And my concern is that we have seen from past history that certain tools die. I mean, we have to be realistic, right? Like notation as a CLI might live or might not live, but the specification signatures are going to live much longer. Let's say we decide to rewrite it in Rust and call it Note or SIG or something like that, then the tool will totally change, but the specification will live on. So I think we need to think beyond the tool name as a brand right now is what I feel.
And just to confirm, no, we're not planning on resurrecting like the V1, V2 stuff, right? Like that is long in the past.
No, yeah, there's no backward looking right now.
No,
That's exactly what we want to avoid, right? Like this is what it is. This is, if you come to Notary project, this is the signature specification and the story. There's no more, but there'll be pointers to the old one if people want to find for posterity's sake or whatever.
The only thing that we should probably at least think about is how do you want to refer to the old versus the new? Again, V1, V2 off the table. I'm not suggesting that, but if you just keep calling everything Notary, like that's going to be mildly confusing. If you want to say like the tough based Notary signatures, like that's one thing.
Yeah.
We would just need to have some sort of agreed upon way to refer to things. And then I'm happy to make sure that that's enforced style wise in the content and in the docs. I just need some sort of like, firm agreed upon guidance as to how do we refer to everything.
So Zach, and I think I have that in the issue that we were discussing last time, but Notary will always refer to the old TUF-based implementation, and it is. Notary project is the terminology that I am proposing to use going forward when we talk community or project wide. So when we talk about the signatures, they are not notary signatures, they are notary project signatures. So there was no specification for the TUF-based implementation of about the signature format. So how is that done? It's in the code. There is no specification for that. So there is no notary signature. So there is only notary project signature with my proposal, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, I see the distinguished. Sorry, go ahead. Was someone going to say something?
Yeah. And the other thing that I wanted to mention is having in mind that actually a lot of people have been using notary as the term in the past. Switching them to use notary project, just adding one more word, is much easier than actually to switching them to say now notation signature, right? That is another thing we need to think about from kind of really user point of view. But like I said, so we can even speak about calling it blah, and we can call it blah signature and so on. I think it will be a mistake if we tie it to the tool. That is my opinion. Sorry, Samir.
Yeah, I shared a link to what the Notary repo calls itself today. If you go to their README file, I just shared a link in chat. They overload the term Notary project as well with a small p. So they have overloaded that term already once.
And that is something that we need to clean. We need to also update the notary README to actually use the right terminology. This notary README is not updated since October. I don't know when it is actually the last update. Let me take a look. Cannot find it. 3 years ago is the last time that this was updated. And as we learned, like, a lot of things that were not documented, and this conversation did not happen in the past about the branding and the naming. So whoever drove that in the past came up with something and started using it, which is what we need to clean right now. So we certainly need to go and update. And also in my proposal, I also said, most probably we need to update also the icon and the logo. So we have not only Notary, but Notary project as part of the logo. You have your hand up, Samir?
Yeah, let me process what you said. Yeah, I think I'll cede the floor.
So in that issue, there's 1684 issue that in that repo, there is 1684 that already created to update the README. I think I can volunteer, or if Toddy gets to it, can volunteer for a PR to update it, saying that this is a client, this is a tool. Literally, that project is a tool, which is a server and a client implementation, referencing the TUF spec. It does not implement the notary specification the way it is. So if we call this if we call the specification something like signature specs, we can clearly in that README say that this does not implement the signature specs, or just leave it as this implements the TUF spec and is kept for, and there's no further development on this repository might be something that we can call out if that helps. But that is a tool, and that's the problem, that the tool actually is also the project name, and we need to fix that repo either way. Whatever we call ourselves, if people come to that repo, would still be confusing in my opinion. So even if you call it notation, notary project / notation versus notary project / notary, both are confusing. So I think it's better that we either I or Toddy, we can I volunteer if needed to kind of make a PR on that repo to clarify that.
Zach?
Yeah. So, and again, and forgive me if I'm getting this wrong. Notary signatures, the spec, is it firmly tied to OCI?
Yes, it currently is.
Currently is, but isn't there a plan to actually not be tied to OCI? We had some discussions in the past that, and even Miran is asking whether we can sign other things. So the signature per se, I think, can evolve independent from the OCI, but I think that's a topic for separate conversation.
Yeah, I was just mainly bringing it up as an option from like a naming perspective, just to throw another option out there. If it's firmly tied to OCI, you can call it like Notary OCI signatures or something like that. I don't want to confuse it, and I want to throw this out there as an idea, and you all feel free to say it's a bad idea or not the best approach. I understand firmly coupling things is not the greatest, but it would be an easier way to refer to things instead of as an alternative to Notary Project, calling it Notary OCI versus like Notary Tough, that sort of stuff that sort of embeds the previous and the new in the naming. Again, just an idea. It's not fully thought through, but wanted to share it with you all.
Thanks, Zach. Miran?
Hi. No, just to kind of speak to you on Zach's point. Now, if let's say the Notary project spec gets if we're looking to evolve it to go beyond OCI, then that would be a problem. Yeah. So I remember having this conversation with Toddy a few meetings ago about what's the likelihood of bringing that kind of capability to the Notary project spec. If that is in the pipeline, then I guess that might not be an option. It would be something. Just wanted to mention.
Sorry, so in your proposal, or Sanjay, your proposal of calling it the signature specs. So basically we are looking for the right prefix, right? We think just specs may be confusing. So we're trying to find the right prefix. One option of prefix is notation dash specs. The other option you have suggested, Sanjay, is signature dash specs. I think if we get the right prefix, or we discuss OCI dash specs, if we get the right prefix, I think we'll be fine. And it is the prefix we are talking about now.
Right, and the reason why I suggested signature dash specs is it will keep the discussion possible for non-OCI based content. Like if you want to sign a file, or you want to sign just a raw SPOM, or if you want to just create a timestamping signature over a signature and things like that, all those things are over encompassing. The envelope of the signature can be OCI, it can be anything over the course. That's what I wanted to share.
Okay, and when we just to fully flesh this idea out, so we will settle on a prefix dash spec or spec dash suffix, something to say this is different, or to make it different for people who are casually browsing. Okay, that's settled. We will pick up the right prefix or suffix. But what goes in that repo? Only the specs from the existing Notary project specs, or other things as well? If it's just the specs, I think we can align on it. But if we're trying to bring other things as well, then it will take more of a discussion.
How do you have your hand up? I have a question.
Yeah. I am, maybe you guys can clarify that for me. I'm a little bit confused. Are we talking about the name of the repository where the specifications will be, or?
That is my understanding. I don't think anything besides the spec should live there. It should just be markdowns, and possibly if you want to put in like some reference of pointers, that might be the only thing that goes there.
So just the question. So we have the Notary project organization, right? We'll have a repository where we plan to put the specifications, right? And the proposal was, and we discussed that last time, under this repository, we'll have folder structure for different specifications, which right now the only two or three that we have are the signature specification, the signature workflow, and the plugin specification for notation. I have a comment of the plugin specification for notation because this is very specific to notation, and I am not sure whether that should live in this repository specifically, because actually it's a very specific for the notation CLI, but the signature, I see it completely separated from notation for the reasons that we discussed so far, right? Are we actually talking like, because we may have other specifications there in the future. Let's say if we do a counter receipts in the future, we may have specification for that, right? We may have some specification for, I don't know, just picking out of the back in my mind is like, how do you enforce metadata on supply chain artifacts? That may be some specification, and it may have nothing to do with notation, right? Notation may not actually create this metadata. Maybe Docker buildx creates the metadata, and also buildx also signs. So absolutely kind of disconnected from notation. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think I hear what you're saying. So I just brought up the list of specs there today. So I think if I hear you right, you're saying these signature specs should go in this new repo. The notation specifics specs like the plugin spec or even the trust store trust policy, because that I believe is also becomes notation specific. That should also go in some other directory or some other area. You're only talking about these three signature specs, right? Signature envelope, JWS, and signature specification.
Yeah,
that
those are the three things that I think are independent from notation, and tying those to notation, I see it as problematic for adoption and usage.
Yeah, and the plugin specs, I think, is specific to notation. So we can maybe move that out into the notation repo if we want to. I think we wanted a unified place to put all the specs together so that we could review it, but it kind of mixed up responsibilities, right? The signature is immaterial, like it's totally disconnected from how a plugin would communicate. The OCI envelope might be important, so maybe we could still have, this is how you create the envelope for the signature, but not have the plugin spec in here. Similarly, trust or trust policy is not a portion of the signature specification. So that also being in this bundle makes it a little confusing. But it's good to have all these things together, honestly, but it's creating confusion among people how we see it. OCI also suffers from the same thing where the image, everybody wants to use the registry, but the registry is a different specification. So it's easy to govern, and but you end up like having slight cross pointers on these, and that's okay. I think it's necessary for people who come here to not get confused. Why am I implementing a plugin when I just want to sign something?
I also think it'll help clarify the naming or the understanding about how the pieces fit together to have a specs repository at the root of the project. Because if you see, notary project / specs or whatever we decide to name it, I think it really clarifies things, especially if it's, the specs are only signatures and things that are unrelated to the tool. And then distinct from that, you have notation and other things. I think that organization would make it a lot clearer to people who stumble upon it, or at least go to that main notary project organization page.
Or could we just point them to the docs?
You could.
And
People-
have the docs stitch things together.
We cannot enforce Google to point them to the doc directly.
I think solving documentation through GitHub repos is one option, but if it is complex, then maybe having a pointer to the docs which stitches these together would be something that's like there are places where you do this way.
Yeah, we certainly need to have pointers to the documentation from each of the readmes on the repositories, right? But also we need to have clear kind of description in the README for each repository, what that repository is and what it means. And I think we cannot avoid that one and just point them to the documentation.
It's different modalities. I mean, different users have different preferences on how they navigate and want to absorb the content. I've received feedback that people have expectations that certain content or certain document, they read the documentation by crawling through the GitHub repo, while others, love going to the documentation site to find information and don't like being kicked over to the GitHub repo. So I think it's fine to share the information so long as we're not duplicating it, to sort of serve both audiences. But I hear what you're saying around, this problem could very well be solved on the documentation side.
Yeah, so I'm just looking at any of the feedback which has come in on this one. Okay, so I think we are at this crossroads of picking up the right prefix name for, or no prefix at all, just calling it specs, as Zach just said towards the end. That is where we are at the moment. I came into the meeting saying, hey, notation specs is the best way forward, and I still believe so, but I'm probably thinking short term at the moment to clarify the confusion, to clarify today's confusion. And Tori, you are thinking a couple of years out, saying these specifications will grow, so let's make the right decision now. And so let's pick up some options of names, potential names, and then we can come back to it over Slack and make the decision.
My original proposal was just specifications, and that's what Zach just mentioned.
Right.
And I think that makes it clear, but and I'm reluctant putting a prefix for the reasons that we discussed, right? Like whether it's notation, notary project, notary specifications, it makes it more confusing than just using the word specifications. That is like very clear what is there. There is no code, it's just a specification. We will have, as like Sajay mentioned, it's a good idea to have release of the specifications and publishing a PDF. I really like that idea. I don't know what you think about that, but it's clear enough, and it's not tied to any of the brands or the names that we use. And it's avoiding all the baggage of the names that we had, whether it's a notary project, notation, and so on. Provides a clearer path going forward because it makes it independent, so we can do the add additional specifications, decouples it from any tool, whether it's a notary or a notation or any other name that we would like. And yeah, but yeah, let me know what you think, Samir.
Yeah, I think, okay, so I'm still not convinced to move away from calling it notation spec, and here are my reasons for it. I like what we are proposing here. Let's rename this so at least the confusion is resolved inside this repo or inside our org, as to once this issue which I'm showing on screen right now is merged. However, if we look at the past 4 or 5 years of history, people have referred to the notary signature, notary project signature wrongly to what the prior implementation of notary did. So those are maybe in third-party blogs, news articles, wherever. We can't go back and change that.
Yeah, it's I hear your concern. I totally agree with that, and maybe there will be a period that we will continue to do that, right? Even like coming back to Kyverno again, because they are one of the early adopters of our project. They like I believe they used Notary in their latest announcement. Right, and we had conversation with Jim after the announcement that actually we should make sure that we are consistent with the brand. So my suggestion, like 2-3 weeks ago, was use Notary Project, not Notary, because that makes it confusing, and we haven't had this discussion about the naming yet. But there will be transition period. We will need to kind of provide more education. But the same way like Notary V2 was used for the last 2 years, right? It came like the more we use the terminology, the easier will for other people to stick to that terminology. As you see right now, Notary V2 is phasing out. So I do not hear Notary V2 so often as, let's say, 6 months ago. And this is based on how we reinforce that message. The more we reinforce, this is the name, this is the terminology that we should be using, people will start getting to it, but it will not be like immediate change. So we should not expect that if we tomorrow publish this terminology, everybody will start using it. That will not happen immediately, but 6 months from now, I believe that will start happening. As I said, I do not hear Notary V2 as terminology as often as last year.
Okay, any other topics to discuss, or this is the topic which is going to move the needle?
I mean, I just have a question about the topic that we're currently discussing around naming. Is resolving this a blocker for GA?
We believe so, yeah. I'm seeing Dory. So.
Yeah,
Because
I'd concur. I didn't want to be the one that throws up the blocker, but yeah, it's I'm assuming that, yeah, like doing all the renaming and doing all the updates across the board, that needs to be completed before we can say GA, right?
yes, and I think let's just play it out as to why they are linked. They're linked. I think there's a strong linkage, but not a must-have. And the strong linkage is, as we announce, hey, this is now GA, we will invite additional people to come back and look at the repo. And when they do, and the confusion is still there, we will not have happy campers. So before we invite more scrutiny or more people to come back, I think if we get the house in order before, that will be better.
Completely agree. The other thing, just as we're having these discussions, that I want to call out is I think that this is a little goes hand in hand with what Toddy was talking about just calling it specification, but people were also talking about, like, we got to figure out the right prefix. I think, and maybe this is just how I'm reading it, we get an implied or an automatic prefix by the org name. So the fact that we're in the Notary Project org, that's kind of, in my opinion, a prefix to any repo or anything that we do. So if we called it specs, like the repo, I'm just throwing something out there, it would be Notary Project specs. Like, not that we wouldn't name it Notary Project specs, it would just be named specs, but you could refer to it as Notary Project specs or Notary Project notation, Notary Project whatever. Like all of these things, I think, get an implicit prefix of notary project. And I don't know if that helps clarify the naming, but like that's one thing that as I was seeing people explore the GitHub repo and talk about, I'm like, oh, like it's notary project X that we're doing. So that's just my thought. I don't know if people agree or disagree.
Actually, that's a very good point, Zach, which also brings me to kind of the when we want to refer explicitly and with the full name of the TUF-based implementation. So it will be a little bit repetition, but it should be referred as notary project, notary implementation. Right. And that will kind of, if we always use notary project in front of what we refer, right, that will make it quite a distinction what we have in mind.
To understand what Zach was saying, what you're saying basically is the prefix is basically implied that it's notary project, yeah?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, that sounds good in my opinion.
Just to disagree on that, not because I want to belabor the argument, but that is the way it was before we added the notation repo, right? You had the notary project namespace for the org, and within it you had the notary and TUF repos. So that was how it was before we started working on this phase 2 or this notation.
Yes, but the thing is that we did not refer to the things with notary project. We referred the things with notary, which was the TUF-based implementation, and with notary v2. Or at least that was my experience, how we spoke about that. So which means that we never put notary project as the brand. So we invented, like we used the notary as a brand, and we use notary v2 as a brand. So there is no corresponding thing for notary v2. And notary was the brand of the kind of the original TUF-based implementation. So we never used notary project as the brand. And that's kind of maybe the mistake that we made. If we use notary project as the brand, that will be something that actually will change in the future.
Samir, to revisit your point that you were saying, did you find the old way confusing, or do you feel like if we go with the approach that I just outlined, it will be confused such that people will think we're still doing notary that's based on TUF?
The old way is confusing. No, it will be confusing still because the TUF notary implementation calls itself the notary project. And that documentation exists not only within our GitHub repo, but even outside of our GitHub repo.
Okay, that's a fair point.
Yeah.
Go ahead, sorry.
I don't know who's like the lowercase project and the uppercase project, Samir. And I know it's we're getting into the technicalities in that, but we have similar conversations in OCI. So the uppercase artifact and the lowercase artifact. That does make a difference when we talk about branding. So Samir, are you sharing your screen or is it Sajay?
I was sharing my screen. I can stop.
Yeah, I see what you highlighted. That's what I wanted to make that point. So using a lowercase project is has a different meaning in branding than uppercase project. That's the only point I wanted to make.
Maybe you all discussed this in a previous call that I haven't fully reviewed, but should we break from the notary name? I mean, I know there's a lot of history with it, and I know there's a lot of work that went into establishing it, making sure it's okay. But I mean, do we need to go so far as to completely fork from the Notary name and just start fresh as of GA? I know it's a lot of work. I'm not signing anybody up for anything, but has that idea been visited?
Yes, we had that one. I think still on the table. We can certainly do that. If
Yeah, I think it's on the table, but not one of my preferred paths. I am trying to see if we can stay within here and do this, because that's just for the amount of work involved.
Okay. I guess maybe Samir, because I think you have a lot of insight on this. I mean, do you think that if we pick something and give it enough time where we're consistently using it, whatever it may be, do you think that after a sufficient duration of time, we can sort of get away from these verbal gymnastics, so to speak, to make sure that we're not referring to something in a confusing or overloaded way?
Yes, I do believe that over time we will get there. I'm just trying to be more short-term oriented to make sure when we announce our GA, the scrutiny we get doesn't turn into, this is not what we expected you to change when we wanted you to change. So I want to make sure whatever we settle on will not invite the wrong, not the wrong, I'm looking for the right word, will not invite unwarranted comments.
Sure. I mean, are there additional people that we can engage with to make sure that, you know, to workshop ideas or namings or distinctions? Are there specific people that you're aware of, at least, or anybody's aware of, to loop into the conversation such that, you know, maybe we prevent any people from having the wrong impression?
We did, and I think this is where we captured all of those things in this issue, right? Is this where the CNCF folks created their issue? Sorry, was it in the Notary project repo? Issue number 264 is?
no, I believe we created 264 per recommendation from the TOC.
Okay.
But so just to give you some kind of feedback, Amy, she is okay with the clarification that I proposed last week. So she said that is clearer if you guys clearly describe it and change all the readmes. That will provide you with a path forward, right? Of course, we need to agree that this is what we want to do. So I believe we are becoming clearer in our communication. CNCF recognizes that. Now, the ask from them is really, it shouldn't be in the issue that I created. It should be on each README and on the documentation.
Yep.
For context, is anything happening with the previous iteration of the project, like Tough and Notary? Are there still people maintaining and making contributions and using it separately than the direction that we're headed now?
We kind of looked at that, and that is another thing that we need to. So the Tough, there is a Tough repository under Notary Project Organization, has not actually seen any activities for 2 years, and this is where kind of we have a proposal to really figure out ways to archive those repositories. The Notary repository under Notary Project also has not seen a lot of activity. However, Docker still has, I believe, support for Docker Content Trust that uses the Tough-based Notary implementation in the back. We need to work with them about retiring also that one. So I believe that when we retire the Notary repository under Notary Project, we will be able to get clean with the brand, and we can continue using Notary project as a brand, and Notary will be forgotten at some time.
Is it feasible to do that before GA, or that's a very long process?
No, I don't believe so.
Actually, let's talk about that. So that issue which you created to rename what's in the Notary, can it happen now before our GA? We're not talking about the project going away. The project will go, but the changes to the README, can it happen before we do our one? No, can we do that first before we move our specs? Because once that is clear and we have agreement from the maintainers of this repo saying they're fine with the way we want to reclassify this, I think it will be an easier sell to move forward with our renaming.
Sorry, Samir, can you repeat that? Apologize,
So,
I missed.
Yeah. So you have created an issue to fix the README here, right? You want to fix this README file, or you or Sajay, right? One of you have said.
Are you showing a README on the screen?
I am. My bad. I paused my sharing. My bad.
Okay.
Okay.
Yes, there is an issue to actually fix that README.
Can we do it tomorrow, or can we do it as a precursor to us changing our repo name? Because once this is clear and agreed by this repo maintainers, it will be an easier sell for us to do what you were saying for calling its specifications.
I think yes, that should be. I totally agree with that.
I'll try to get a draft PR out today.
Okay, yeah, let's do that. I am all for it.
Yeah, because if this PR gets, then for anybody who's coming to our org, it will be clear to them that this notary has nothing to do with the big notary project with the capital P. It is just a subset of the big notary project with the capital P, and it doesn't relate to those specifications.
Yeah, okay. Sajay, do you want to take that one?
Yeah, I don't know whether I'll get approval from the maintainers, but I'll anyway create a PR and we can use that as a forcing function.
Yeah,
So
I think this gives me to go back and revisit our thought process on this renaming.
Okay, so Sajay, yeah, let's get a PR on that. We're running out of time, so next step is really getting the PR on this README and getting approval from maintainers on the repository. So Samir, I believe also the organization of maintainers, they have a way in on that, so we can work with the org maintainers to say, yes, we would like to move with that change.
Yes, because once this change is agreed, the other change we are talking about will be easier sell, or I believe so.
Okay.
So one thing is, in the PR, I cannot say that this does not implement something, because that something doesn't exist. What I can do is that this repository. Yeah. So what I'm doing right now, like I have the PR on the side right now going while we were speaking.
Right.
What I'm rewording it as, this repository is a reference implementation of the update framework specification and has moved. And in the second overview, I'm also removing the part that this project has been accepted to blah, 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 CNCF and all that. In the overview, the Notary project comprises of a server. I'm retitling it as, this repository comprises of a server and a client implementation. So it's clear that this has got nothing to do. Now the logo is a bit more tricky. Whether we should remove the logo or not is something that we can even follow up. But if do we want to just get a new logo? That might be something else we can turn around also.
Yeah, I think we do. I think that was one of Story's idea to have a new logo.
Sajay, may I recommend just two things. One is, if we can avoid the use of project, whether
yes,
it's
that's what I'm doing.
Yeah,
I'm doing that. I'm saying this repository from now on. So
I would also suggest, instead actually using take for example the overview that it says the Notary like uppercase notary, if we
Yes.
can use actually notary lowercase, and meaning that this is the repository,
Yeah, okay, yeah.
that will be good. And yeah, I was gonna propose to remove the logo. I would do the
So,
PR
let me do this.
without the
I'll
logo.
create the PR. You comment on the PR saying remove the logo, and if somebody is against that, we'll kind of like take from it.
Okay. Yeah. Okay.
Okay, let's do that. And I'll go back and share this update with the other stakeholders.
Thank you, Samir. Appreciate that. Thanks, everyone. I need to drop off. Do we have anything else, or because if I drop off, I can also close the meeting, I think.
Sure, we can. Thanks, bye.
Thanks. Have a nice day, everyone.